I'm going to start here. Angel Reese wants credit. She's not getting enough credit. She did this too. She taunted Caitlin Clark. She made this whole thing. The reason why WNBA is up is because of Angel Reese.
Did you hear what Jason Whitlock just said about Angel Reese? He didn't just disagree with her, he completely dismantled the financial illusion behind her push for higher pay. While Reese and Carrington are threatening to sit out if their salary demands aren't met, they're overlooking one massive issue.
I went from liking Angel Reese a little bit to now I don't like Angel Reese. I'm back to she's just bad news.
The WNBA is losing $30 million annually. That's right. The very league these players want more money from is bleeding cash. Whitlock didn't hold back, calling out their entire approach and saying they're playing checkers in a game of chess. Could this be the most out-of-touch demand in sports history?
You know, she's fallen right in line with the rest of the WNBA. She's just an angry feminist.
You think Angel Reese's demands are reasonable? Wait until you hear what Jason Whitlock had to say about the WNBA's financial state. While Reese and her fellow players push for bigger contracts, Whitlock dropped a truth bomb that completely dismantles their argument. He didn't just disagree, he exposed a harsh reality that most basketball fans aren't even aware of when it comes to women's professional basketball.
They have a sit-down on Angel Reese's podcast and start talking about the money they want and what the WNBA is planning. If they don't get there, the players don't get their money.
When Angel Reese sits on her podcast arguing that WNBA players deserve higher pay, Whitlock points to a brutal truth: the league has been hemorrhaging money for years. And not just minor losses. The WNBA is losing around $30 million annually. Let that sink in. A league losing that much money is somehow expected to hand out bigger paychecks.
This kind of talk, and they're not talking about this season, they're talking about next season, their collective bargaining agreement. This is a league that averages losing $25–30 million a year.
Whitlock didn't mince words. He basically called these players entitled for demanding more money from a league that can't even sustain itself. The harshest part, he suggested that instead of asking for higher salaries, these athletes should actually be paying to play, considering the WNBA's financial situation. Can you imagine any other professional athlete being told they should pay for the privilege of playing? That's how bad Whitlock believes the situation is.
These women are talking about, if we don't get what we want, if we don't get what we deserve, if you got what you deserve, you'd be paying to play in the WNBA.
What makes Whitlock's critique so compelling is how he exposes the massive gap between what these players think they're worth and the economic reality. While Reese and others speak about their value and leverage, Whitlock points to one key figure: the WNBA's $25 to $30 million annual losses, as the only number that truly matters in this discussion. In his view, how can you demand a bigger slice of a pie that doesn't even exist?
NBA, but to be fair, and you're right about that, silence is golden, and sometimes less is more when it comes to players talking and using their platform and getting out their message.
Things got even more interesting when Whitlock addressed Reese's threat to sit out games if salary demands weren't met. His response: he essentially dared her to do it, knowing it would have zero impact on the league's success or viewership.
I wonder, though, if the average WNBA player that none of us knows is actually saying, "Hey, Angel, would you shut the f*** up? Seriously." Because this does not help the perception of the league.
But Whitlock's reaction wasn't just about calling Reese's bluff. It was about highlighting a larger problem unfolding in real time. The constant social media presence and non-stop podcast appearances by today's athletes are fundamentally changing how fans perceive them, and not for the better. According to Whitlock, we're watching WNBA players sabotage themselves, tweet by tweet and podcast by podcast.
You know, Steve, when I watched that video, one of the main thoughts that goes through my head is just like, overexposure.
Have you noticed how nearly every player has a microphone in their face these days? Whitlock called this out directly, saying, "Everybody's got a podcast. Everybody is getting interviewed non-stop. Everybody's putting themselves out there, and they don't realize they're harming themselves. It's like they're willingly stripping away the mystique that once made sports stars special."
Just overexposure. Everybody's got a podcast. Everybody is getting interviewed nonstop. Everybody's putting themselves out there, and they don't understand they're harming themselves.
Whitlock says Agnel Reese is playing checkers in a game of chess. He believes these players are making a fundamental strategic mistake, broadcasting every grievance and demand without considering the consequences.
That we're getting too much exposure to Agnel Reese and Dejanay Carrington and the rest of these players. And so athletes from previous generations that didn't have podcasts, didn't have social media.
Think about it, past generations knew very little about their favorite athletes beyond their performance on the court. Michael Jordan wasn't constantly updating the world about his contract negotiations or posting his thoughts on league policies.
They had the advantage of, we didn't know much about them. We didn't know how greedy, entitled, stupid, we didn't know because they weren't overexposed.
Did you catch that? Whitlock made that exact point, explaining that athletes from previous eras benefited because they weren't overexposed. Fans weren't privy to their personal opinions, financial frustrations, or entitlement. Today's players, on the other hand, constantly put themselves in the spotlight, revealing traits that fans might not admire: entitlement, lack of strategic thinking, and short-sightedness.
These guys are overexposed and they're playing a game of checkers in a game of chess.
The conversation between Reese and Carrington perfectly illustrates this issue. By openly discussing strike plans and salary demands, they're showing their hand to everyone, including league executives and skeptical fans. Even worse, they may be causing division within their own ranks.
Anyway, this is just a bad look for the WNBA. Agnel Reese just wants content for her podcast. She's playing checkers in a game of chess.
Can you imagine what other WNBA players are thinking right now? Whitlock certainly has. He suggested that many are probably thinking, "Agnel, would you shut up?" Every time Reese speaks out about these issues, she risks damaging the league's image and making it even harder for players to gain public support for better salaries.
But to be fair to the rest of that league, I wonder how many other women are thinking, "Hey, Agnel, be quiet. Be quiet. You make a lot of other money doing other things. We actually like this job and need this job. We're all working for a vision. Don't ruin it for the rest of us."
Speaking of players who might be thinking, "Agnel, would you shut up?" There's one glaring omission in Reese and Carrington's entire leverage discussion that Whitlock immediately called out. How do you talk about WNBA player value for an entire podcast without once mentioning Caitlin Clark?
And if I'm an average, everyday WNBA player who appreciates what we have, I'm thinking, would you just be quiet? Seriously.
He pointed out that the two players most openly hostile toward Clark somehow managed to have a full conversation about league leverage while completely ignoring the biggest driving force behind women's basketball's surging popularity.
It's funny that the two people having this conversation are two people that absolutely hate Caitlin Clark and are jealous of Caitlin Clark.
You see, Whitlock didn't just call out this omission. He hammered home what it reveals about Reese and Carrington's real agenda. It's no coincidence, he explained, that the two players most hostile toward Caitlin Clark are the ones plotting a work stoppage. While Reese is out there demanding more money and threatening strikes, Clark is quietly putting in the work, letting her game speak for itself. This stark contrast wasn't lost on Whitlock, who praised Clark's approach while criticizing Reese's constant need for attention. And
couldn't think to say during this entire deal, like, because of the leverage that Caitlin Clark has given us, we may actually get paid more than what we deserve.